So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us at our latest webinar. We're talking today a little bit about where the market is for apps now, and then we're looking into the future a little bit at how they're evolving and the concept of this post-app era that everybody's talking about. So as a quick intro, I'm Paul Jarrett. I'm the MD here at Sonin. My background is actually in development. I used to be a developer many years ago, and I actually set up a prior web agency to start up Sonin with the intention to help people capitalize on the emerging mobile opportunity. The first app that we actually produced way back when was for the Nokia 3310 as a dating app. And nowadays, I don't get involved in the development so much. My main function is to help our businesses, help our clients' businesses understand mobile and understand how it can affect them and how to make the most of the opportunities. I'm pleased today to be joined today by Christine Busque, who's a neuroscientist and product manager by training. I believe she fell in love with technology and app development very early on and left her academic research career and hasn't looked back since. So let me just pass you over to Christine for a quick introduction.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining. I'm Christine. As Paul was mentioning, I am a neuroscientist by training, and I will tell you just a little bit about my background first to give you a bit more of an understanding of where I've come from and really what's a neuroscientist doing in technology, right? So I have been working in app development now for about exactly 6 years and a couple of months, and time has flown by because it tends to do that when you're having fun with your career. But prior to that, I was doing behavioral neuroscience. I researched the effects of very low dose embryonic alcohol exposure on social behavior development. If that sounds like gibberish, what it comes down to is basically trying to model what happens if a pregnant woman has an occasional drink, and what happens later on to that child as it grows into an adult. And for that, we did use a model system, because you obviously cannot do this type of research on humans, not in an ethical way anyways. But I spent about 10 years in research and then became involved in developing apps for researchers. So I'm still really within that sort of ecosystem today, but in a very different way. I'm not here to tell you that everyone has to color with blue crayons. There is not one perfect way to develop an app that is going to be successful. There's not one way to predict that something is going to be the next Facebook or Instagram, but there are things that we can learn from the success stories, are things that we can also learn from psychology and from neuroscience that I like to apply in app development, and I am here to share with you some of the experiences that I've had, ultimately for the reason that I would love to create as many fantastic user experiences as possible and delight users, whatever app it is that they're using. So that is the goal that I have in my career, and that is the reason that we're here today to share some notes and some thoughts with you on what we've seen so far.
So I guess a pretty good start point, Christine, is to run over the top a little bit of what it is that you feel makes a great app today.
Right, yeah. So if we're going to talk about what makes a good app, there's a little bit of use also in going back in time and thinking about where we've come from with technology, and I know that's coming up in the next slide, but I'll share a little bit about my experience with Papers, which was the first app that I worked on. And I joined Papers in 2011. It was a very small startup, and the goal of this app was to basically go from the state you see on the left to the state you see on the right. So the picture on the left is real. That was not staged. This was actually somebody's desk. It had collapsed under the weight of the number of research articles that this particular professor had on his desk that he was, combing through and sorting and whatnot. So of course, the picture on the right was just taking that opportunity to showcase, hey, if you use Papers, this is what your desk could look like. So essentially, Papers is a repository where you can store all of your research documents. You can then do things like cite them, you can annotate them, like highlighting them, you can share them, etc. So this is an app for researchers, whatever their field. I come from, of course, the biomedical sciences, as did a lot of my colleagues at Papers, and we really leveraged the needs that we had. The point of it, though, was it did one thing extremely well, and it solved a very fundamental problem. It solved the problem where if you download a PDF and it comes into your onto your hard drive and it has a nondescript name like pf17 whatever .pdf, you probably won't find it back anymore if your library has 10,000 PDFs in it, which is pretty common if you've been a researcher for a few years. So papers would automatically grab all of the metadata, all of the information that is in that document, and it would rename the file. It would store all the metadata with it. It would store any additional files that belong to it with it as supplements. So it took a lot of that painful sorting and working through and renaming away from the researcher having to do it and spend time. So when I think about what makes a great app, it is something that solves at least one problem extremely well. And I think we're seeing a bit of a trend towards apps not trying to do too many things at once. They have to be good at doing one fundamental thing.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there, because obviously there are reasonable abandonment rates with some apps, and user retention is absolutely key. I think what you're saying there about designing with the users at the heart of it, and making sure that what you're doing is achieving something for them is absolutely vital, and is a big change maybe from where we were a few years ago, where it's maybe taken from a product point first, rather than really putting the user at the heart of things. Which is quite a nice segue on to talking, obviously, if we look at how things were and how things are. I'm interested to know a little bit about how you feel that things are changing going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if we think about where we've come from in terms of let's just look at smartphones. And by the way, I'm by no means suggesting Android should not be in the picture here. It's just that there wasn't enough space. Now, I'm not going to date myself too much, but I've used a BlackBerry a lot, and I used to love BlackBerry. And I did not use the other first version of a smartphone there all the way on the left, the Simon. So I suppose I am young enough to not have had that experience. But in any case, if you look at BlackBerry, we used to, I think, pride ourselves a little bit to have to learn something, to have to learn how to use an application, or to read a manual, or we weren't really expecting our expectations were not as high as they are today, because technology was still newer and there was less for us to compare it to. Maybe that's how I should put it, actually. So if you needed 5 clicks to get to your email, that was normal, so you expected that. Today, if anything is going to take more than 2 or 3 clicks to get to an endpoint, that's just no longer acceptable. So you have to bear that in mind. Right, so we've really come a very long way in a sense, and at the same time, it's not that long ago that our expectations and experience with mobile apps was quite different from how it is today. And beyond that, if you think about how many apps on a BlackBerry you could personalize in any way, I can't think of all that many, actually. And if you look at how many apps we personalize today, and we'll talk about this, I know, a little bit further down the line, but it's substantially a larger number. So another thing that has changed and that has been made possible with more recent technology and how things are moving forward is the fact that apps are integrating with each other. So here we're looking at a screenshot of my LinkedIn app on my phone. Sorry for having to white out some of the information, but of course I didn't ask this person's permission to splash their face on the screen. So the point of it is, though, that LinkedIn automatically knew that I had a user testing session at 4:30 p.m. with a particular individual, and it made the suggestion for me to follow up with them about that user testing session. And it even tells me that I was the one who invited this person to connect. So it has stored all that data. It has also interfaced with my calendar, and it then feeds back personalized and relevant information to me for me to engage again with that application. This is absolutely brilliant because it's making our life easier in a sense. It's feeding a need that I didn't know I had. I certainly didn't feel like I needed LinkedIn to tell me to follow up, but the fact that it did was very useful.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because progressively more and more we're seeing that people that they want that seamless experience. I think bit by bit that they need it and require it slightly. So the idea of having to putting that information into two different systems feels a little bit awkward. Whereas the ability for LinkedIn to pick up on your previous activities and make suggestions increases that sense of delight and makes everything feel that little bit smoother and a little bit seamless.
Yeah. It also reminds me though of it reminds me to a little bit a degree of, you know, when they first started personalizing ad experiences, like if you did a search for air travel, then for the next 3 weeks you only have ads for air travel, right? Anywhere you go. And at first I think people were a bit so about that, because it's like, oh, you know, we feel spied on. And at the same time now, I think we're expecting one system to know what we're doing in the other system so that we can leverage that information. And like you said, we don't have to do it twice.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting that the human nature is that, of course, when something new comes along, you're potentially a little bit cautious of it, but bit by bit, as we become more used to it, and Facebook are, of course, the masters of this, where they release something a little bit more than you're comfortable with. They take 2 steps forward and they take 1 step back, and bit by bit you become more accustomed to it. I think things like these seamless integrated systems are going to become more and more part of our lives, and rather than just finding out that your flight is late by your EasyJet app pinging you a message, it will then go on to rearrange things like hotels, bookings and meetings. And whilst today that maybe feels like a big jump, I think that we'll find that bit by bit we feel more open to those types of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I think, you know, with the accelerating kind of growth of technology, and we see that curve obviously picking up, and we've talked about this previously in another webinar. But as we start to see our real world experiences, the technologies that support those coming along, so we look at things like voice activated assistants, like IoT, and the various other opportunities for real world through iBeacons and everything else. I think we're going to see the blending together of some of these tasks that we're used to achieving on our smartphone becoming part of our everyday. And that really leads on to this concept of the post-app era. So last year, I think Gartner announced that we're entering into the post-app era, which of course that are maybe starting to just look at apps for the first time, or maybe have their first couple out, to hear that we're moving into this second era. But I don't know about you, Christine, but for us, this is really about, when you talk about the value that you bring to people through the tasks they achieve through the apps, this is just about them being able to then realize these in a host of different places in the real world. So you don't necessarily have to go to your phone. You can potentially do it through any one of a number of other devices.
Yeah.
And you know, in this connected world where we have wearables, we have big screen TVs, we have billboards, we have cameras, everything is talking to itself. And while mobile may well stay at the heart of this connected world, I think the way that we're achieving the different tasks is going to change slightly, and maybe the interfaces will be ever so slightly different. I think it still ties back a little bit to what you were saying before, about how can you help the user achieve these things.
No, exactly. So that really begs the question, like, what is making your users' life difficult? What are some of their pain points? What are the areas that they're struggling with, or that they're spending too much time on? What are some of the gains that we can make, whether that is reducing time spent on a task, whether it's reducing stress that's required with the task. And also, if something is already being done quite well, is there any way we can actually make it better? And one example here that is quite relevant to all of us is email. Most email apps, they work fairly similarly to each other. You have an email inbox, and that's where everything comes in. And then, you know, whether you have folders or tags or what have you, everyone does it slightly differently, but it comes down to about the same thing. We all still have that problem, though, where a month down the road we might have forgotten about an email that we should have replied to, and you wake up at 2 in the morning and you think, oh no, there was that email from 3 weeks ago and I should really get to that. And then you have to go hunting for it. Now, the reason you forgot about it is because it gets pushed down in your inbox. You don't see it anymore. So there are some apps that are trying to address this, that are trying to change how we process that. But that's one example where, yes, email is great. It's done quite well, but are there still gains to be made? Absolutely, I think there definitely are. And it really should sit at the core of what is your user's problem. So here's a bit of a fun example for you. We're looking at a couple of sisters here that live in an enclosed monastery in New York. And if you look at the left of the picture, the red contraption, it's called the Prayer Companion, and it was developed by an organization called the Interaction Research Studio. And what this does is it's a feed. It's basically your most simple feed that you can imagine. It just scrolls messages on a very simple screen. And the reason it does this is because these sisters are supposed to be enclosed in a monastery with very minimal to no contact to the outside world. Now, their calling in life and their task in life is to serve God and to pray and to be involved in spiritual life. But if they don't know what's going on in the world because they're not connected to it, they don't know what to pray about, right? So they don't actually get a lot of news. They don't get to hear what's going on outside of their walls. So the Prayer Companion is a feed of issues that they could pray about. And it resolves, it's a very simple device, it's technology, and it resolves only one problem in a very effective way. So I think this is a fantastic example of like, how can you pare something down to the most kind of simple form? Like, what is your fundamental problem that you're trying to solve? And then what is an MVP that you can build on that? Like, how can you resolve this in the most simple possible way?
I think it's a fantastic example. I think it's really interesting because we quite often talk to people at the start about understanding what it is that they do and what it is that their customers want, and we go through a process that we kind of call setting up for success, where we talk about the verbs that people are able to enact with them, and we talk to them about the data they're collecting and everything else, and how we can get them in a position where they can iterate quickly so they can use lots of different interfaces, albeit we don't have too many clients using one quite like those nuns. But I think the principle is reasonably similar, and I'm interested to know a little bit about how you think that people can put themselves in the best place to be able to leverage things as they change.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the very simple answers to that, and the most straightforward one, is indeed to stay very much up to date with the latest technologies. If there are things that can integrate with each other, they should be talking to each other. If they don't yet, you want to ask yourself why. Why don't all apps talk to each other? Why is it not possible to, for example, share a PDF on WhatsApp? What can still be improved on? And I'm just randomly giving you examples of actually my own personal pain points. So know that the user is already expecting that you're spying on them, and that's what this picture is for. You're not really spying on them. And the other side of that coin is you need to be very careful about data privacy. You need to be very careful about how you communicate that to your users. You need to be very careful that they understand exactly what it is that you're collecting from them and for what purpose. But that's a separate conversation. Bearing in mind that you have done all that, you've done your due diligence, then start integrating with our calendars. What opportunities are there to leverage the camera on the phone? What opportunities are there to leverage tasks or reminders? And what can you do with other apps that are not obvious candidates to be integrated with what you're already trying to offer? But really think outside the box of how you can connect a user's world more together, and really how you can connect that user's problem to the solution that you are offering. Because the more frequently you do that, and the better you do that, the more you're building a habit. And at the end of the day, if you want your app to be used over and over and over again, it needs to become a habit, right? So another thing that I would say is personalization. We're expecting a very personal experience these days. We choose who we follow on Twitter, and therefore we self-curate the news that we see. We also, of course, choose who we connect with on Facebook and LinkedIn, and therefore we can curate the news we see. But beyond that, if you look at the picture on the far right, that was just an example of my own Facebook account. And even though I've chosen to follow the Huffington Post, I could still unfollow, of course. I could hide the post, or I could see fewer posts like this, and I can turn on notifications for the post. So I can, even within the personalization that I've already done, I can refine that even further. Amazon uses the data that they have collected on, of course, my shopping habits to make further suggestions. So whenever I open Amazon and I'm actually looking to buy something completely different, it will make suggestions for me, as in, hey, you bought this stuff, maybe you need some more of it. And if you look at the picture very closely, certain pet people will be able to tell that I have a bunny rabbit. So it's adjusting electric cable protection, and it's adjusting some pet food and whatnot. So these are things that if you're a retail app, you'd want to leverage that data that you have to try and increase your sales, right, and your conversions. The app on the left is going to be unfamiliar to, I think, most gentlemen. This is something that's definitely just for women. So this is an app that tracks your monthly cycle. And I really like what they've done because it's very simple. It offers a solution to only one problem. You want to understand when something is going to be happening with your health and with your body. And it does offer you, however, certain more advanced features with that. So you can not only track when things are happening or not happening, but you can also add to that items like you just traveled, or you were experiencing stress, or you're actually ill. Now, a really nice thing here is that I had marked that I was ill a few weeks back on my calendar, and it offered me a personalized suggestion of information about what this might mean and how this could influence my cycle, and useful information for me to know about. So again, reasons to go back and use the app, right? So these different things are building in that habit forming that I was just talking about as well.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting to see where these habit forming products kind of move to next, because there's obviously the digital versions, but a couple of examples here that are kind of solving real world problems as well. Personalization around prescription refills, obviously the information they know, they're making that process to get your new prescription that bit easier. And maybe one that's quite close to my own heart down at the bottom, having a young son who's recently decided he's not a fan of sleeping anymore, is the possibility for the Starbucks app, which obviously now you can pre-order your coffees in advance and everything else, and therefore there's potential to seamlessly integrate some of these things a bit further down the line, so that as it realizes I've woken up at 5 o'clock in the morning, maybe it makes a suggestion and asks if I'd like to pre-order my coffee so that it's then ready as I walk past the Starbucks on the way into work.
Yeah.
So these little steps for, as you say, personalization combined with that seamless transfer can make for some really strong products, I think, down the line. Which then leads on to the question a little bit about, as we start to look at what's maybe changing in the world, what we can do to prepare for tomorrow's users.
I think this opens up a really bigger discussion about how we use technology and how technology is there to both enrich our lives, to build connections, to improve how we experience relationships, but also one can argue, and people have argued, that technology achieves the opposite, that we're more lonely, more isolated, more unhappy because of it, and that it cripples our attention span. So it has two opportunities. And the question is, how are you as a company or as a brand, which direction do you want to choose? Do you want to use technology to help your users organize their lives better so that they have more space to think, they can free their minds for deeper focus? And do you want to stay away from being an app that cripples attention span because it keeps serving notifications over and over again? Currently, people who use technology a lot, they tend to be in one of two modes. They're either distracted or they feel a fear of missing out, because if they're not checking Instagram, whatever post is coming by, they're not seeing it. If they're not checking Facebook, whatever news is there, they're not seeing it. And at the same time, it can be very distracting. People check their phones anywhere between every couple of seconds to multiple times an hour, and that's considered normal. Like if you think about it, 10, 20 years ago, we were not worried about missing a phone call. We were not worried about checking, before smartphones, you weren't checking your phone for that purpose, but it was a much less central role in our lives. So in terms of the user of tomorrow, they're both going to continue to expect more and expect things to be more seamless, more integrated with each other, practically for their phones to predict their lives. And what you said earlier about, your flight is canceled, send a notification for your hotel booking to be updated. That is a brilliant example of where things could and probably should move to, but within the context of giving people the power to choose what relationship they have with technology. That is, at the end of the day, at the heart, the most important thing. You want your users to get from it what they need. So yeah, we need to create apps that create experiences for the users where they're empowered to use technology in a way that improves their lives and improves the tasks that they need to accomplish, but not be so distracting that it negatively impacts their daily activities. So we need to provide that empowerment where choice is at the center of it. And because when we do lose focus, it actually takes over 20 minutes to regain that focus again. So if you're having distractions constantly all day long, it makes it a lot more difficult to get other things done. So if you have a productivity app, for example, it's helping you do one thing, and then it's actually working in the opposite direction and hurting your productivity elsewhere, then that's not very helpful. So if we allow users to set to personalize the experience to an extent where it is serving them notifications when they want them to be served, or where they can pause something and say, right now I'm trying to focus, so I don't want to see anything, then those are some great choices to make. And a really good example of this is actually an app that I've been using. It's called LifeSum. It's a meal tracking app, and you can track exercise with it and whatnot. It's one of those lifestyle apps. And they ask you to set yourself when you want to be reminded about tracking your meals. So you set a certain time of the day when you usually have breakfast or lunch or dinner, and then only during those times are you served a notification for it. So if you're a person who eats really early or eats really late, you can personalize that experience, and you're not getting notifications at inappropriate times. At the same time, you can also turn that off entirely. Another thing that we need to keep in mind is that the way that we use technology, it influences our brain. It is changing our brain. It changes how we think and how we interact with people and how we relate to people. And when I say relate, I also mean the context of actual relationships. And we can leverage that knowledge. We can look at cognitive psychology and see what elements can we use to create apps that people want to use. And at the same time, let's all focus on creating apps that not only people want to use, but that are of use to them, so that serve their purpose. We can also think about how we use motivation. People are both extrinsically and intrinsically motivated, so that means they can be driven by internal or external factors. Internal factors that are motivating for someone to go back to your app or to continue using your app are, of course, the cues that are within the app. So depending on how you're building it or what you're building it for, that's why I'm keeping it a little bit vague, because it'll vary on the purpose of the application and how you're putting it together. But it can also be extrinsic. So, and a perfect example is activity apps. So if you're a runner, you're trying to pick up running, you might use an app like Runkeeper to track your runs, and then the motivation is both within the app and as well as externally to it. You might derive pleasure from running. But some people don't derive any pleasure from running, so the motivation then has to be purely intrinsic, so within the app, where their joy comes from being able to see their progress or being able to track their runs and share them. Another example is an app called Sweatcoin, where they give a financial reward for completing outdoor activities. So if you yourself don't want to be active, you don't enjoy being active, you don't enjoy running, but you understand that for your health you should probably try and get out more, then an app like that might be very very motivating and very useful. So I think we're seeing a lot of these different things connecting to each other, where we're using human psychology, but we're also using understanding of what is it that the user wants, and how can we allow them the power to personalize things more and more, so that really we're not serving them an app, but the app is serving them.
That's really interesting. So how do you go about starting that process then, when you're looking to kick off and plan and develop and go through the initial discovery phases? What would you say are the first things that you should start thinking about from your user's point of view?
The pain points. It comes down to solving a problem. One of the first things to think about is, what is the reason that I'm making this app? And saying, well, it's because I want to make an app is not a good answer. Certain brands, certain companies, certain products, and certain services, they lend themselves perfectly well for mobile app development, and some don't. So having an understanding of where your limitations are or where your opportunities are is extremely important. Getting an understanding also of how your users are going about the tasks that interface with the product that you're trying to build is extremely important. So really listening to the user comes into play here. at the end of the day, it's extremely important to have an understanding of really what is it that your user is trying to accomplish, and also what is it that is preventing your user from either accomplishing it or doing it very well or very easily. So if you understand what the pain points are, really where someone is spending most of their time on a task that they don't enjoy doing, how can we make that short? Said that, when you do understand both your brand and your product well, provided that that's pre-existing, if you're developing an app as a new thing and you don't have an existing brand or product that you're serving through the app, it's a different story. But let's say you are a big retailer and you feel you need to have a mobile presence. Having both an understanding of what is your brand, what is it that you are offering your customers, what is at the core of your value system as a company, and then in addition to that, most importantly, what is it that your users are trying to achieve. So if you are, say, a clothing brand, and you'd like to have a mobile app, then uh, one obvious purpose could be so that your users can make purchases, right? But is there an opportunity there to have an understanding of why are your users or why are your customers purchasing your brand? What about it is important to them? And can you leverage that and provide content? Can you enrich the experience in some other way? Can you connect fans of the same brand to each other? And is there a reason for doing that? Yes or no? There might be, there might not be. If you're coming at it from the other perspective and you're saying, I've observed that there's X number of people who are experiencing this problem and I'd like to resolve it, and I think it's great to do with an app, then that's a different perspective to come from. So you first think about, where am I coming from? Where are my users coming from? What are their problems? And go from there. Then as far as making sure that they're not one of those 23% that leave after the first use, you want a user to invest in your product. This is obviously a very recognizable example with Pokemon Go. This counts for, and I'm not a gamer, so forgive me if I'm saying something that is not entirely from a lot of personal experience here, but from what I understand, most games have an opportunity where you get to personalize an avatar, where you dress them, you say, I'd like it to be a girl or a boy, and they're going to be wearing whatever they're wearing. The actual act of doing that, and again, this is coming from psychology, the fact that you invest in something makes you more likely to return. You don't want to waste nobody really wants to waste their time, not naturally. So once you've done this step, once you've made the investment, you're much more likely to use the app again. And that again plays back into what I was saying earlier about personalization, about allowing a user to choose how they use the app and how it serves them best. Another thing that I'd like to say is, don't be afraid if your users end up using your app in a way you never thought they would. So here's a personal example. This is obviously Uber, and you can see a map of Toronto actually here, and the ride was to go from an address in Toronto to the airport. Pretty simple, straightforward. The app was on my phone. This is my screen. This is my screenshot. But I was actually not in Toronto. I was in London at the time. I ordered the Uber to pick up my mother from her address and to take her to the airport. Now, why would I do that? Why wouldn't I just have her do it? First of all, because she's in her 60s and she really does not like technology as much as I do and does not feel confident with pinpointing on the map where she is. That's the start of it. Then secondly, the other reason is it was very late in London and I wanted to know that she got to the airport okay. So the added advantage for me is that I get to track her ride and say, oh, okay, so now she's arrived. This is good news. I can go to sleep now and not have to worry. So these are just little things that, you know, if you are observing your users using your app in a way that you didn't intend for it, play into that and find out what else can you do with that. How can you make this a feature? And let me add, the only way this is even possible is because Uber allows you to input the address to start from. And you're not only relegated to a point on a map where you are in that moment, right? So I'm guessing the reason they did that was in case that the map was not accurate, but actually you can use it in many different ways as well, which is fantastic. The other thing that I'd like to almost close with is, I mean, there's a lot of debate about whether Henry Ford said the thing about the faster horse. You know, if he had asked his customers what they wanted, they'd want a faster horse. Supposedly he never said that, but nonetheless, it's a fantastic quote for the simple reason that I think sometimes we have to appreciate that we can ask our users whatever we want. Sometimes we don't know we have a problem or we don't know that something could be better until someone comes up with that. You know, we wouldn't have thought that we would be carrying thousands of songs in our pocket 25 years ago. And that's a possibility now. We never thought we needed 25,000 songs in our pocket. But for whatever reason, this is very convenient, right? That we can do that, that we have the opportunity to have a device in our pocket that is both a phone, a calendar, a personal assistant, a music player, you name it, and we can do it. So it's great to listen to your users, and you always have to start from that perspective. But don't discount that spark or that moment of a creative genius that might come to you. You might have a fantastic idea, not knowing whether or not that is actually going to work. Your users might not be the ones that generate the ideas for you. Sometimes you do, but then you have to go back to them and just check that indeed this is something that they would use.
Absolutely, and this is one of the things that we kind of talk about post-release, is when you can do your user research and you can understand your audience and engage with them to a high degree, but it's only necessarily once you release the app and put it out there in the wild that you start to get that feedback, real-world statistics about what it is that's actually happening. And we have this turn of phrase, the aha moment, which is just about then looking back at what people are doing with your app and understanding what it is that makes them part of the percentage that carries on using the app, and what the trigger point is that represents that investment that you talk about, that keeps people coming back. So there's some classic ones out there in the industry for Facebook. I believe it's 7 friends. Once you've made 7 friends on Facebook, your timeline becomes busy and there's more interesting things, and at that point you keep coming back.
Yeah.
So looking at what people are doing and understanding that aha moment then allows you to customize your experience and tailor it to driving people towards realizing that value. Facebook, the value isn't there if you don't have any friends.
So it brings up a really interesting idea around feeds, actually. If you talk about Facebook and you have to have so many friends to make your timeline interesting and to get more updates and whatnot, this also feeds back into something that's quite ancient and quite hardwired within our brains. And it's coming from a hunter-gatherer sort of place where you actually get reward for novelty. You get reward for getting that news, and your dopamine spikes, your nucleus accumbens is involved in this process too. But you need to go back and look at new feed items because, well, 1 or 2 might not be interesting, but the third one would be, and that's enough of a reward for you in order to get you to keep coming back. So that's actually one of the reasons that there are so many feeds in so many different apps. It's not that everyone's trying to be Facebook or beat Facebook or do what they're doing. It is because there is a solid reason why a feed does bring people back and does drive retention.
Absolutely. I think it's really interesting around the variable reward side of things as well. And the fact that if you get the same reward each time that you visit an app, then potentially you don't get that same addiction off the back of it, compared to that variability where sometimes you find something fantastic and sometimes you don't. So moving on from there, as we look at things like how this post-app era may well affect us all and affect us as companies, one of the things that we have to bear in mind is the variation in our customer journey. So nowadays, as technology starts to move into the real world, we need to understand how people are going to interact with us at every single point. So we're not just looking at just the online journey. We're now looking at how people will move through our stores, how they'll see our advertisements and everything else. So when we come to look at how we're going to fulfill these tasks for our users in the real world, in this post-app era, mapping out the customer journey and understanding their pain points and the tasks that they're challenged with at all the different points becomes increasingly important. And as we kind of touched on a little bit earlier as well, we have to try and make sure that these experiences that people have are completely seamless, because as soon as there are holes or there are fall downs, these things start to become a little bit awkward and it erodes the value for users. So there are various examples from previous times where people will carry out an action through an app that isn't connected to the same set of CRMs, for example, that their website would be used for, which means that the experience is disjointed. People become frustrated and they stop using one channel or another because it doesn't help them fulfill their requirement. So as we start to look at how we can ensure that these experiences are joyous and really deliver great value to our users, we have to think a little bit about the technical side of things. We have to think about how all of our systems are going to connect to each other and how possible it is to actually ensure that data is in the right place at the right time to power our Alexa integration or our mobile app or our in-car display, for example. So as far as a few key takeaways go for today, the main things to consider at the start of building your apps are engaging with your users early. So this is understanding about what it is that they want to achieve, the pain points they have, the different ways that they're going to then be interacting with your brand. So the customer journey throughout both the real world and the digital world, and understanding what data it is that you're going to need to power those movements and those different interactions. Looking at how those systems can be connected together is a very important part, making sure that experience is completely seamless. And of course, now there's new legislation coming in over the next year or so, so understanding what the jurisdiction of the data is and if there are any legal ramifications you need to be aware of. And then post this point, once you've got to the point where you're ready to launch your app, then being aware that you're going to continually refine this journey, that it's not just a one-time thing and that you need to re-engage with your app users to really understand what it is that they're doing, how they're going to get the most out of it, and how they're changing over time as well. So thank you all very much for listening. Thank you very much for joining us today, Christine. It's been fantastic to hear your insights and very great to learn a little bit more about the psychology behind these things as well.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's brilliant. Christine's details are there on the right-hand side as well. And obviously, if you want to get in touch with us, we're on the left-hand side there. You can reach us at sonin.agency. So thank you very much for joining us, Christine. And I look forward to you all joining us again for our next webinar in the series.